Peyton Manning was on another level.
When Peyton Manning was on the field, guys watched.
It's easy to have this revisionist history and say, all right, Brady won, so Brady's better. I don't necessarily agree with that.
I know Peyton Manning had 5 coaches in the NFL, and he took 4 of them to the Super Bowl. Peyton Manning went through 4 Super Bowls with 4 different head coaches, which means Peyton Manning was the system. You can argue, is it Pat or is it Andy Reid? We argued before Tom Brady left, is it Brady or is it Belichick? Ain't no arguing with Manning. Where Manning went, Super Bowls followed him.
How does the first quarterback who fully controlled an offense on the field become an afterthought in his own generation? Well, when one guy wins 7 Super Bowls, it happens pretty easily, unfortunately. But my question is this: should quarterback wins be a bigger factor than actual impact on the game? Tom Brady's career is the greatest ever for a quarterback, but it's based primarily on his Super Bowl wins, not necessarily on what he brought to the game that others didn't. But when you look at today's game, what impact do you attribute to him?
Don't worry, I'll wait.
Because when it comes to Peyton Manning, I can see his impact in nearly every elite passing game every week. The quarterbacks checking from run to pass in order to play cat and mouse with defenses and truly commanding their offenses are the direct products of what Manning did in Indy. He may be seen as the guy who lost to Tom all the time, but the quarterbacks don't actually play versus each other. And we know that. The head coach in New England happened to be one of the best defensive minds the NFL has ever seen. And while Manning may have had the better weapons, he never had defenses that were as consistently great as New England did. And contrary to popular belief, Peyton had a winning record against Brady in the playoffs. None of it seems to matter though, when one of the 2 QBs has 7 Super Bowl wins. And this is life, when you are one of the other guys in your generation.
You are a bad guy, but this does not mean you're a bad guy.
Welcome back to Unlikely Success. Like, comment, and if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Today, we're going to talk about how Peyton Manning became one of the other guys of his generation and how much surroundings matter when it comes to quarterback success. Let's start by setting the stage with some background on Peyton Manning. The Manning family today has become football royalty, but this wasn't the case in 1998 when Peyton was drafted first overall. He was seen by some as a generational prospect out of the University of Tennessee, but he still had to beat out Ryan Leaf for the top spot. Yeah, that's how good Ryan Leaf was in college. It may seem crazy today, but in 1998, there was a legitimate argument around who should go number 1.
I can remember when Peyton Manning came out of college the same year Ryan Leaf did. I preferred Ryan Leaf because I saw Peyton play live.
The Colts would make the right call and take Manning, and it changed the team's fortunes. They had won 2 playoff games in the 20 years prior to drafting their star QB, but everything was about to change with the sheriff in town. His rookie season can only be described as rough. He threw 26 touchdowns, but had 28 interceptions. It was very Jameis Winston-like. The Colts went 3-13, and today, Manning would probably be chased out of town. I can only imagine how many media pundits would be calling for him to be benched and discussing how the Colts had a bust on their hands, how they should have taken Randy Moss or Charles Woodson, and both of those guys are great players, but neither of them would have been able to do what Peyton was going to do in Indy. After the debacle that was his rookie year, he would lead the Colts to winning records in 11 of the next 12 seasons. This included a Super Bowl win and loss. And even though it seems like Tom Brady was constantly in his way and keeping him from more opportunities, that only happened twice, in 03 and 04. After those 2 losses to Brady in the playoffs, Manning actually won the final 3 playoff matchups between the 2. It's weird how narratives rewrite reality, but Brady didn't own Manning the way many might think. During Manning's time with the Colts, they won their division 8 times. But that's less than half of what Brady did in New England. If you add in the Broncos years, you get 4 more, but Brady still has 5 more with the Pats alone. Manning was truly dominant in his career, but the Colts simply weren't as good as the Pats in the 2000s. And this became the story. Brady, quote, owned Manning because his team was better during regular seasons, and that was where New England beat Indy. It was not in playoff matches because that's not what created this story. The Colts contended consistently, even if their defense was average, and that's because their quarterback was a superstar. During his time in Indy, Peyton Manning would win 4 MVPs, be selected to 11 Pro Bowls, 8 All-Pro teams, have 6 30-plus touchdown seasons, 11 seasons over 4,000 yards, and his other 2, he threw for over 3,700 yards. He played 13 years with the Colts, and he never threw
for less than 3,700 yards.
Pretty good.
Unfortunately for him, though, there was a guy who won 3 Super Bowls and lost 2 in New England. This made Manning's 2 appearances in Super Bowls feel like a letdown with the Colts, when it really shouldn't have. But when you are comparing all-time greats, everything comes into play. Manning's biggest accomplishments can only be measured when you consider the way he was doing it. No QB ever had control of their offense like Manning had. The team would audible in and out of plays multiple times, consistently use up-tempo offense, and their QB was truly a coach on the field. It was something the NFL had never seen before. Peyton had been drafted to a bad team and asked to turn them around, and that's exactly what he did. He not only became the face of the team, but he was the foundation that a contender was built on. Brady may have had more team success, but it's hard for anyone to argue that the 2000 Pats were built on Tom as the driving force. That's a true differentiator for Peyton. In 2011, Manning would have neck surgery, and later, spinal fusion surgery. At the time, this prevented him from completing his throwing motion at all, and he was ruled out for the entirety of the season. The Colts had just signed him to a 5-year, $90 million deal, but the season was a disaster without their superstar, as they went 2-14. Just for reference, when Tom went down with the Pats in 2008 after just 1 start, New England went 11-5. What I mean by this is the supporting casts were very different. Anyone who disagrees can, but the records speak for themselves. And it's not like Matt Castle was Steve Young replacing Joe Montana. Indianapolis was faced with a dilemma heading into the 2012 draft, as Andrew Luck, another generational prospect, was going to be available to them with their number 1 overall pick. And Manning's injuries left more questions than answers on whether he would be able to return to his MVP form. With a $28 million roster bonus looming, the Colts decided to release their all-time QB.
CBS News correspondent Armin Katayan has confirmed that the Indianapolis Colts will release quarterback Peyton Manning.
I've been a Colt for almost all of my adult life, but I guess in life and in sports, we all know that nothing lasts forever. My goals were, I think, like what any NFL player should have as a goal, is to play your entire career with the team that drafted you.
Manning would become a coveted free agent with multiple teams pursuing him. Ultimately, he chose the Denver Broncos, a team with pretty good skill position players, a burgeoning defense, and a quarterback who had not been fully taking advantage of either. Sorry, Tim Tebow, but it's true.
Oh, it's true.
It's damn true.
Manning landed, and the team took flight, winning 5 more games in 2012 than they did in 2011. All questions about his injury were subsided as he threw for nearly 4,700 yards and 37 touchdowns. He won the Comeback Player of the Year, and if it wasn't for a miracle play at Mile High, he would have had an AFC Championship matchup with Brady's Pats. But Joe Flacco could not be stopped in the 2012 playoffs. 2013 would see all-time passing records set by Peyton, as he threw for 5,477 yards and 55 touchdowns. He won his 5th and final MVP, beat Brady in the AFC Championship game, and led the Broncos to a Super Bowl appearance, but they would lose in convincing fashion to the Seattle Seahawks. 2014 would be Peyton's last prime year, as he threw for over 4,700 yards and 39 touchdowns. His Broncos lost to his previous team in the divisional round, and few saw what was about to happen. In 2015, Manning looked cooked. His arm strength was diminished, and it was clear he no longer had it. Over 9 starts, he threw for a shade over 2,200 yards, and for the first time in his career, had less than 25 passing touchdowns. In an ironic turn of events, though, the Broncos won the Super Bowl with their defense, and along the way, they beat the Patriots. This gave Peyton a 3-2 advantage over Brady in the playoffs. It also put an end to a truly remarkable career for the Sheriff. Over the course of 17 years, he won 2 Super Bowls and lost 2, received 5 MVPs, made the All-Pro team 10 times, Pro Bowl team 14 times, and finished with 71,940 passing yards and 539 passing touchdowns. He was a clear first ballot Hall of Famer. When we compare Manning and Brady, though, for most, it comes down to winning. Team success is more than a quarterback, though, and many like to point to the fact that Peyton had Edgerrin James, Marvin Harrison, and Reggie Wayne, but Tom didn't exactly play with as bad of a cast as people make it out as. But it is fair to say that Peyton probably had more skill position talent. It's also fair to note that in Peyton's 13 seasons with the Colts, only 5 of the defensive units that he had ranked in the top 10 scoring defenses. Whereas over 18 years with the Pats, Brady had 15 groups that were in the top 10. In fact, 5 of those were either first or second in that metric. My point is, Brady had a significantly better defense the entire time he was in New England. He also never won a Super Bowl without a top-tier defense, even in Tampa. Manning, though, won his first without a stellar group, and he was carried the second time by an all-time great defense in Denver. Brady has almost every passing record you care about, but he did this with 4 more full seasons than Manning had. He has all the postseason moments anyone could ask for. And Peyton is largely seen as the regular season guy. But looking back at his playoff numbers, they're not as bad as you would think. And if head-to-head playoff matchups are considered, Manning edges him out. Tom's longevity was truly amazing, but his average season was not as good as Manning's. Even his peak years were not as good as Peyton's. I would also argue that the Sheriff's impact on the NFL led to a much better product on Sundays, and Tom's led to rule changes and scandals that his organization does not want to address anymore.
But forget about that. If we were wrong, then we've been disciplined for that.
But I cannot pretend that any quarterback's career was better than Tom Brady's. That is simply not true. I can provide pushback on who was actually better on the field, though. And while both were playing, that was Manning, at least to me, and I don't really think it was all that close. But let me know what you think. Who had the bigger impact on how the quarterback position is played right now, Peyton or Tom? Today, Brady spends time in interviews talking about the need for players to sit a year and learn, and that's great, but his counterpart was not afforded that chance. Manning had to go through an awful rookie year to become a great player. His time in Indy was dependent on him being the star. Unlike Peyton's counterpart, he didn't have a top-tier defense to lean back on, and he wasn't an underdog story. The Sheriff was seen as a generational prospect, and while I believe this term is used way too often, he lived up to it in a way that none of the others have. Not John Elway, not Andrew Luck. Peyton is the best performing generational prospect since the term became popular, and that's no small feat. This has been the unlikely success.
And the last point I'll say is this. Everybody experienced their greatest success with Peyton Manning.